Hi. So today I'm going to try something new, video blog. It's something that I haven't done before, and who knows, I might get used to it. And what I want to talk about today is command and control leadership. Well, command and control management. And I make a distinction between management and leadership. And why am I going to talk about it? Well, I use command and control as an example on quite a few occasions of practices and habits not to get into, of a negative style of leadership. And it's interesting because there's an example in my head that I go back to all the time. An example of a person that I go back to all the time when I think of command and control. So let's take a step back. So I mentioned command and control leadership, and then I talk about how strategic leaders are not command and control leaders. How a transformational leadership style is an alternative and more effective way to lead people. So what is command and control, and how do we recognize it? Well, let's go back to my example. A senior executive that I worked with some years ago, who exemplifies this in so many different ways. He had a particular personality that when he said to jump, people would ask how high. At least that's how I used to characterize it. And we're all used to using that term. But what would happen is that teams would compete against each other. People would compete against each other. And it was either to show him that they were capable or show him that they could get results. It wasn't necessarily about the results sometimes. It was about ingratiating yourself with him. His teams were quite frequently anxious or afraid of what his reaction might be. I remember, I was, I suppose at this stage of my career, I probably was inclined to not speak up about things like this. So I was in a meeting with him once, and he talked to me about a program that he had put in place many years earlier. And actually, this wasn't just myself. There were a couple of other people in the room, and they were now responsible for this program. The comment he made was that he had put it in place a number of years ago, and he expected people to change it. He expected over time it would have evolved and would have met whatever the market needs were at the time. And he didn't feel it had. And he sat there and he smiled, and people smiled back at him. Nobody made any comment. In the back of my mind, what I was conscious of was that people had said to me in the past to be careful, because if people hadn't agreed with what he had done or said, they were either moved out of the organisation or in some cases they were fired. So I guess I was being cautious at the time as well. But there's a really good example of command and control. He created an environment in which people wouldn't take risks. People were afraid to take risks. In fact, one of the terms that I heard on a number of occasions was that the team were successful in spite of themselves. So think about that for a minute. They were successful in spite of themselves. Think of how much more successful. Think of the type of results that perhaps could have been achieved without that millstone holding teams back. Because if you're afraid to take risks because they mightn't pan out, then you don't innovate. You absolutely don't innovate. Things become very samey. Everything gets done similarly. There's a process for everything. Why is there a process for everything? Because that takes the risk away. We know this worked in the past, so we'll do it again. Does it deliver results? It does. If it doesn't deliver results, well, we'll change some part of it. We'll figure it out. But we'll keep it in line with the process. And, interestingly enough, even as he was saying this, he was the one who was rolling out another program elsewhere in the organization. And it just wasn't going well. And people were going back to him to say, what should we do? How should we do this? He had teams of people who were highly capable, and they continued to do things the way they thought he wanted them done, and going back and asking him what to do if it wasn't working. They'd come back and ask him for validation of what they were doing, or they'd ask him to put something in place or to write something or to whatever that could be shared with others who asked the question, why are we doing it this way? Rather than figuring out themselves that this is the wrong way to do it, and changing it, quite simply changing it. And there were changes that need to be made. Interestingly enough, a couple of years later, I was put into the position where I had to fix that. I had to fix what was wrong with it. And I think at this point in time, I was a little bit more confident in myself and my abilities and my teams, because I knew I could get a team behind me and working on something. So what I did was I just asked them, what are the problems? What's not working here? And they told me. And I said, how are we going to fix it? Or how should we fix it? Because I didn't have the answers. I didn't actually know how we should fix it. And it was okay to say that. He, on the other hand, would always have an answer. If you went to him with anything, he'd be inclined to tell you how to do it. Or on other days, give you some proposals or something that you could work with. But the reality was people wouldn't take any risks with him. So we sometimes view command and control managers as people who may not be as effective. But the reality was quite a lot of results were delivered under him. He was a visionary. Here's the thing, he was a visionary. So any of these programs, when he proposed them, they were things that the market needed that didn't exist already, or if they did, not in our industry. But here's the thing. Even though they were visionary ideas, they were constrained by what his original vision was. Why? Because people were afraid to actually stretch that. People were afraid to take a chance on it. If it worked, and to be fair, in particular this one, it should have worked. It did work a little, but it certainly wasn't successful. And it took guts, determination, and a lot of anxiety at the time for me to turn it around. A lot of anxiety because there was always that concern, if I wasn't right, or if the team weren't right, that there'd be repercussions. How is that in terms of operating as a team leader? How effective can you be as a team leader if that's the environment you're dealing with? So that's why I talk about transformational leadership and strategic leadership. And I distinctly describe command and control as a manager, not a leader, because they're managing the situation. They're managing people. They're not actually leading, because leaders don't constrain people to what their view of the world is. So on a final note, remember, command and control doesn't necessarily mean a lack of vision or a lack of desire, or even a lack of success. But imagine what the success might be if it was the combined capability of the thinking power of everybody on the team, as opposed to everybody on the team trying to fit within the guardrails that he, rarely intentionally probably, but certainly he imposed. I'm Damien Mulligan, and I support particularly leaders in tech to gain confidence and remove themselves as single points of failure while being effectively able to leverage the strengths of the team as authentic, transformational leaders.